So this is the first video that we have for the final topic for Year 12 Studies of Religion, which is Religion and Belief Systems in Australia post-1945. So in this whole section we look at the religious landscape in Australia and why it is the way it is, interfaith dialogue and ecumenism, and we also look at Aboriginal spiritualities and how they've been affected by the actions of white people essentially, and that covers the whole thing. So we start off with Aboriginal spirituality, and the first dot point that we need to look at is contemporary Aboriginal spirituality, which is really talking about the dreaming. Before we can come up with an understanding of why Aboriginal spiritualities have been impacted and how they've been impacted by the policies of the Europeans, we first need to have an understanding of what Aboriginal spirituality is. And at the crux of Aboriginal spirituality is the notion of the dreaming. So we'll have to initially have a look at what the dreaming is. Then we can have a look at aspects of the dreaming and how they're linked to other areas of Aboriginal life. So Aboriginal understandings of the origins of the universe and the dreaming, sacred sites and how they fit in with the dreaming, and how the dreaming is communicated to Aboriginal people through kinship groups, ceremonial life, art, stories, totems and rituals and those sorts of things. So the first thing that we need to understand is that we can't really talk about Aboriginal spirituality without talking about the dreaming. And we can't talk about the dreaming without talking about Aboriginal spirituality. They are intertwined in a lot of respects. They really are one and the same sort of thing, because the dreaming encompasses everything it is for an Aboriginal person, their whole spiritual life, as it were. So the dreaming is the foundation of all the beliefs and all the practice that Aboriginal people conduct and believe. It really is their understanding of what the past is. It's their understanding of how to conduct themselves in the present. It's the accumulation of all the knowledge of previous generations that have gone before them. It also informs Aboriginal people of what their responsibilities are to the land and to each other, and how their relationships will be formed with each other as well in their own clans and in other wider communities as well. So it's really all of the information that Aboriginal people have garnered. That's what it is. It's an accumulation of all knowledge, and it really is linked to all aspects of life and understanding and belief and practice in Aboriginal society. The next thing that we really have to understand about the dreaming is that it's hard to really define, because a lot of the understandings that we have as people generally from European and from other descents is that we find it very difficult to put into English the understandings that Aboriginal people have in reference to the dreaming. It's really hard to actually explain what it means for Aboriginal people. On top of that, we have the difficulty that there were originally over 900 Aboriginal language groups which all have their own different interpretations of the dreaming. There's no sort of one understanding of the dreaming that all Aboriginal people adopted. They all had commonalities of belief and commonalities of understanding, so we can make some really broad assumptions about what the dreaming means to all Aboriginal people, but we also have to remember that different Aboriginal groups had different interpretations of the dreaming, and it meant different things for them as well, and that our understanding of it is really challenged because we don't really have the language to be able to discuss it in a way that we would understand it the way the Aboriginal people would understand it. So what this means is that we're never really going to have a great understanding or a completely accurate and full understanding of what the dreaming means to Aboriginal people, but we can make broad assumptions about what it means, or what the dreaming means to a lot of Aboriginal people, and that's where we sort of draw the line for that. So like most cultures in their spirituality, or like many cultures, Aboriginal people as well also have an understanding of the origins of the universe. And that comes through in the dreaming and the notions of the dreaming and dreaming stories as well for Aboriginal people. They do have, well, what we have to understand is that different Aboriginal people have different sort of origins of the universe stories. They vary from group to group, geographical location to geographical location, and also from language group to language group. But the common understanding is that we have ancestral beings, so people linked to current members of Aboriginal communities who acted upon the land. So they did something upon the land to make it the way it was, to create the origin, or to create the universe the way it is understood to be now. So what these ancestral beings are, the reason we use the word beings is because they're not necessarily human. They can be human. They could be sort of part human, part animal. They could be a plant itself, or it could be an animal as well. And what we have is that they're responsible for the way that the land has come to be as we know it now. And it's also these ancestral beings that have sort of created the responsibilities that people have, in terms of the dreaming now as well. So they've sort of created the relationships that people will share and their responsibilities that people will have to the land that was sort of created by these ancestral beings, as well as part of the dreaming. So when we're talking about these stories particularly in regards to origins of the universe, we can't really sort of say that it's just a myth, or it's just history, or it's a combination of both even. We can't really say that at all, because for Aboriginal people, the dreaming is a metatemporal concept, which means it doesn't have a place in time. It's sort of, it exists, or it doesn't exist in one part of time, doesn't exist in the past solely, or in the present solely, and it's not just happening now solely. It means metatemporal means it can be happening in all of these places at once. So it's not fixed in any time at all. So there's sort of no concept of past and present and future in regards to the dreaming, and we can't sort of look at it with that sort of understanding. So what we have to also understand is that, and this is incredibly important for your responses, is that the dreaming is inextricably linked to the land. When we're talking about the land for Aboriginal people, it is incredibly closely linked. You can't talk about the land without sort of referencing the dreaming for Aboriginal people. It's incredibly closely linked because the land is the way the stories are told. The land is it's the medium through which we understand the dreaming. It's sort of, I suppose, we have to understand that for Aboriginal people, this is where the ancestral beings dwell. The evidence of their impact on the world is seen through the way that the land looks, and Aboriginal people have responsibilities to the land and to each other as a part of the dreaming as well. So remember that word, the dreaming is inextricably linked to the land. You will use that in your responses. So the next thing we'll look at is Aboriginal sacred sites. It's pretty important to remember that there are a variety of different sacred sites for different Aboriginal groups. So it's not like there's one sacred site for all Aboriginal people. Different communities and different groups will have their own sacred sites that have particular significance for them because they're connected with particular events that have happened in the dreaming for that group. So that's really important to remember, that different groups will have their own different sacred sites that they are linked to and that are important to them. So in regards to these sacred sites, Aboriginal people, as a part of the dreaming, have certain responsibilities that they have to fulfil in regards to these sacred sites. So whether that's ceremonies or rituals that have to be completed, that's part of their responsibility as part of their spirituality, because this has been initiated in the dreaming, that this is what they have to do as a part of this community. They are linked to this sacred site and they have to fulfill their responsibility by completing this ritual or this ceremony. And it's important to remember too that Aboriginal people were initiated into these sacred sites. They're sacred for a reason. They might not even be known to everyone, and it might just be a place. It might be a tree, it might be a clearing, it might be another part of the land. It doesn't have a marker here that says this is the sacred site for this people. It's just a place, and you might walk past it a million times and not know that it's a sacred site until you're initiated into that sacred site. And then it would be made known to you, and you'd be entrusted with those responsibilities to keep as well, because you are now initiated into that sacred site. The next thing we need to look at is the communication of the dreaming, and because the dreaming is so pervasive into all aspects of Aboriginal society, it is communicated in a variety of different ways. So through kinship groups and understanding of relationships to different people within clans, as well as ceremonial life, art, stories, rituals, totems, those sorts of things. So it really encompasses everything about Aboriginal life, so it is communicated in all these different ways. And these will vary from Aboriginal group to group. And just finally, in terms of the communication of the dreaming, it really is a lifelong process. It's not like where you just sort of you learn, the 10 key rules of the dreaming and then you know them. It didn't work like that. The whole way through your life, you'd be initiated into new mysteries or new parts of the dreaming and new understandings of the dreaming the entire way through your life. And that's why for Aboriginal people, the elders are so incredibly important, because they were the ones who would initiate the younger people into these new understandings of the dreaming throughout their lifetime and pass on that knowledge and understanding about the dreaming to the younger people. So the first thing we need to understand with Aboriginal people is the Aboriginal notion of kinship. And the kinship groups that have been established in Aboriginal societies and communities, they're systems of belonging and responsibilities that people have to one another and also to the land. And it's those family relationships and broader community relationships that make up clans of Aboriginal people, and the relationships that are held between those groups are what are also based on the dreaming as well, the understanding of the dreaming as well. So the dreaming establishes for these Aboriginal people these kinship groups that they are bound to, so the responsibilities that they have within these kinship groups. So they can be based on another notion in Aboriginal spirituality, also linked to the dreaming, called a totem. In American Aboriginal spirituality, there's also a notion of a totem, which is a totem pole. This has nothing to do with that, so you need to get that image out of your head because it's very different from that. A totem is a symbol of one thing for another thing. So for Aboriginal people, they are given a totem which is linked to themselves, and that might be a plant or an animal, and they have certain responsibilities based on that totem, because that is where these ancestral spirits dwell, because they dwell in the land, in that plant or in that animal. So they have an extra responsibility in regards to that totem. So that might be to not hunt that particular animal or take any of that particular plant, and that was part of Aboriginal understandings of the dreaming and therefore their spirituality as well. So this notion of the totem, as well as the understanding of where you fit in with your family, so those familiar relationships that they help people, or Aboriginal people, they help determine, based on the dreaming again, who within their kinship groups they can talk to, who they can marry, as well as other responsibilities, specific responsibilities that they have to their clan as a result of that totem and that familial relationship. The last thing that we're going to have a look at, which encompasses a few areas, is ceremonial life for Aboriginal people and how that also helps Aboriginal people to communicate the dreaming. And we will have a look at, in regards to this, art, stories and rituals as well. So in regards to art, Aboriginal artwork communicates a lot about the dreaming, because what it does is it represents the actions of the ancestral beings on the land, and that's done through a variety of different symbols which show what the ancestral beings have done, but they may not always be sort of a literal depiction of what actually happened in the dreaming. It may be more metaphorical as well. And sometimes in regards to the symbols themselves, they may only be sort of understood by those people who have been initiated into particular groups within Aboriginal communities and clans. So it might not be understood by all people within that community because that knowledge hasn't been yet passed on. Aboriginal stories are also very important because they also communicate essential understandings about the dreaming. They can be, and again they vary from group to group, so different groups have their own dreaming stories. And what's important to remember is that they have specific reasons. So whether that's communicating an understanding of how the universe came to be as it was through the actions of the ancestral spirits, and that's what the focus of the story is, or whether it's about conveying rules and laws and traditions of that Aboriginal clan. So that was another way of communicating the understanding of the dreaming to other people, and those stories were particularly important for Aboriginal children because a lot of the time they had a moral aspect to the story as well. Next thing we'll look at is rituals. So rituals and ceremonies are really important for Aboriginal people for conveying the dreaming, because what they are doing is reliving in the actual present something that happened in another time in the dreaming. So the ancestor spirits and what the ancestor spirits did in the land is being reenacted through these rituals and these ceremonies. But they're not just they're not just sort of a narrative of what happened. It's by the people partaking in this ritual, and I suppose giving themselves over to it, and by actually representing it, they are reliving it in a way. So it is actually happening at the same time. So there's that understanding of that metatemporal nature of the dreaming as well. Finally, again, back to totems. We sort of mentioned those before in terms of who you could communicate to in family groups and in the notion of kinship. They're also really important in regards to communicating the dreaming, because when we're talking about ceremonies and rituals, because the totems that people are given are representative of what they would have been like in their primordial state, which is what they were like prior to the dreaming having occurred. Or as they would have existed, during the dreaming time. So during the dreaming, that's what they would have been like, or that's who they were, I suppose, during the dreaming. And they carry with them the notion of balance rights. And balance rights is another really important term you need to understand, because what it is it allows, I've mentioned this before, certain species of animals and plants to flourish. So, for example, in the dreaming, a clan or a tribe might be linked to the goanna as their totem, and that means that tribe in the dreaming were goannas, and they would have certain responsibilities towards the goanna, because it is that is their ancestor spirits inhabiting those goannas. So it is like their family members, sort of, I suppose, in those goannas, and that also help the wildlife flourish and not be sort of driven out, I suppose. So that's a bit of a broad overview of what the dreaming is and how it all works together and how it's communicated to Aboriginal people. And there's some more links to Aboriginal stories in the iBook for you to have a look at as well.